and drugs. Most of you as teachers or counselors have had the experience of a kid you know really well literally withering in front of your eyes. And you wonder, what's wrong with the parents? You know, why don't they see? Why aren't they doing something? And you've made an attempt to tell them and gotten an angry defensive reaction. And with all the fear of being sued and so on, you've backed away. Inside, you continue to hurt because you care about kids learning, and when you go in class and 10 of the kids, 5 of the kids have their heads down, have the glazed looks on their eyes, you wonder what you're doing. What happened to your love of teaching? Your love of seeing a kid get a new idea and come alive with it. What I want to share today is a technique that we've developed that has helped numerous school counselors, psychologists, and teachers get beyond that wall of parent denial and help a parent face the problem that their kid has a problem and to do something about it. Let's begin with parent denial. Why do parents say, not my kid? Kid down the street, somebody else's kid, not my kid, when their kid is failing in front of their eyes? I know for Ruth Ann and I, the initial reason that we denied, in spite of the fact that we were both alcoholism counselors, is because we loved our child. In spite of our head knowledge, in our gut, we were frightened about drugs and kids. We knew that alcoholics could recover, but for us, the picture of the drug addict was the heroin junkie who died from use and never got well. And so when the possibility of drugs reared its ugly head with our 14-year-old Mark, we loved him, and we simply didn't want it to be there. And we almost begged him to find ways to convince us it wasn't there. Denial is not careless parenting. It's not callousness. It's not lack of care. Denial is refusing to see something that is there because of how bad it's going to hurt if you have to face it. What happens with parents is that they deny because it threatens their confidence. When Mark started to have problems, we got a reaction out of my mother. Her reaction is, what's wrong with how you guys are managing Mark? We knew that if some of our friends knew, they'd have the same reaction. You know, kind of stand at arm's length and say, what's wrong with you people? You know, anybody who's married and has male and female equipment can take care of raising kids. And so our own sense of self-esteem as parents raising a kid was threatened by the possibility of drugs. The acknowledgement to other people risk all kinds of embarrassment. People kind of making remarks, kind of suggesting in a humorous way over a couple of drinks, well, I could take that kid and straighten him out over the summer. And of course, all of that really hurts. And so parents simply refuse to acknowledge the problem to avoid that kind of hurt, that kind of sense of failure. We deny in a variety of ways. First of all, we minimize. When the incidents begin to occur in the kid's behavior that indicate something's wrong, we kind of, in remembering them, cut down the gravity, the seriousness, how defiant, how angry, all of that kind of thing. We also rationalize. Kid gets in trouble at school, and we blame the teacher who doesn't understand our sensitive child, or doesn't understand that boys will be boys, and so on. And we suppress. Certain things that happen are so painful, we simply push them down and don't remember and don't allow ourselves to feel the feelings, whether the feelings are hurt or embarrassment or anger or fear. And finally, we blame. It's somebody else's fault. It's the kid down the street who's leading our kid astray. And that prevents us, because we've got a convenient target to be angry with, it prevents us from doing anything about our own child. What happens is that using those techniques of denial, we end up building a wall around ourselves. A mental and emotional wall that protects us from having to see what's really going on. For the kid to get help, the wall of denial that parents erect, where they say, it's not my kid, has to come crumbling down. And let's talk about how that happens. It takes a crisis to break the denial, where literally the kid's problem explodes in flaming pain in a way that the parents cannot avoid it. Often the crisis is not actually something related to drugs. It may be getting arrested for breaking into somebody else's house where the pursuit is really for money or for pawnable objects. It may take an episode where the kid is kicked out of school for violent defiance of a teacher, but it is some inescapable crisis that explodes in the face of the parents. What happens is that crisis ends up crashing the wall. It's the final straw that breaks the camel's back. But to really understand it, we have to go back before that crisis. You see, it really takes a series of natural crises, things like a family fight, an arrest, an overdose episode that ends up at the hospital with terrified parents wondering if the kid is going to survive with a healthy brain intact. It may be a runaway episode where the kid disappears for 4 or 5 days and calls home trying to blackmail the parents into a freer deal at home, or a school suspension that really forces acknowledgement of the fact that this kid has a problem and it just might be drugs. For most of us, it's not one crisis. We can remember the final crisis, and I can describe the final crisis with Mark vividly. It was the night where, after we had had 2 stumbling drunk episodes, he was put under tight restriction, and this particular night he wasn't where he was supposed to be. And when I found him someplace else with some other kids and hauled him home, and there was the angry exchange and the slammed door and the stereo up, and I unslammed the door and turned the stereo down, it was later that night that his brother Miller found the pot pipe, and we tore the room apart and found stashes of marijuana and paraphernalia. But for us, to do something about that final crisis, to act, to put Mark into treatment, to finally stop the madness, a series of things had to happen early to prepare us. There had to be the 2 earlier stumbling drunk episodes, just before the 15th birthday and right afterward. Second one, he admitted to trying a little pot. There had to be the incident where he came home and called Ruth Ann at work because a police officer was looking for him. He'd been drinking in the neighborhood and driving too fast on his dirt bike. And there had to be an incident at school and several other things. So there was a building sense that something was wrong with this kid, and we were beginning to walk on eggs and live with knots in our stomachs about him, out of fear, out of anxiety. And those things had to set the stage for the final crisis that blew up in our face so we could actually see and say, hey, wait a minute, we've got to do something. We've got to do something to relieve our pain because we can't stand this anymore. And that's why most parents act, because they can't stand it anymore. The series of crises build to that final incident that breaks the back and forces change. And what happens is literally those incidents chip away until the wall in one moment collapses, and all of a sudden the family is there in awful pain, but with the honest realization, this kid is in trouble and we must do something now. The problem with waiting for a natural crisis is that some serious losses can occur. Some things can happen that you can never retrieve. Some of the losses you can go back and with hard work pick up. The kids, a lot of them have blown school before parents see. And so they end up having to go back to school, out of touch with schoolwork, a year or 2 older than their classmates, and missing some of the normal healthy joy of proms, graduating with people who are friends, and so on. For other kids, the school losses are worse. They've lost sequential pieces of learning that they never really pick up adequately. They can blow jobs. They can also create almost permanent, irreparable damage to the family relationship. Psychological damage can occur in terms of self-esteem and in terms of some real losses mentally. Permanent physical injury can occur because of accidents under the influence and overdose episodes. And of course, the frightening one is that kids can die. The boys that Mark was with, the day that final break-the-back incident occurred for us, all died 3 days later, the day after we put Mark in treatment. They were smoking a little pot, taking a 5th kid, a friend of theirs and Mark, to a JV football game, and on the way back, they were just high enough that they turned in front of a pickup truck, and the Volkswagen Bug they were in was just demolished, and they were dismembered all over the highway. And of course, for those families, the natural crises came too slow and too late, and they will never have a chance to face it and to do something and to save those kids' lives. And that's scary and very heartbreaking. Let's stop a minute and remember the progressive stages of kids' involvement with drugs. If you remember on the first stage, kids are learning that drugs will change their feelings, and it happens when they're hanging around with other kids and somebody suggests they try it feels good. And during that first stage, they only use when another kid happens to have some stuff and share it, usually pot or booze. Behaviorally, nothing is visible. There's no change in schoolwork, behavior at home, any of that kind of thing, so there's nothing for parents to see. On the second stage, kids have decided they like the good feeling, and they're not content to wait until some other kid happens to have the stuff, and so they get their own money, private space, and stuff so they can get high when they want to. And since it feels good, they start to get high pretty regularly, usually regularly on weekends, eventually slipping over to weeknights. Behaviorally, some things do happen at that stage, but they're usually fairly minor. They are usually an exaggeration of adolescent, out-of-control feelings. The kids give up hobbies and sports, but not the main sport and not school. There are some things for parents to see, but nothing that can't be denied as a little bit of an exaggeration of the teenies. On third stage, the kids have become preoccupied with getting high. It literally is the center of their life, and everything else pales in the background, including family activities, school, sports, old friends, and so on. Nothing matters but getting high. And that's the point at which, behaviorally, the drug use breaks out all over the face of the kid's life, like a bad case of behavioral acne. And parents can tell then. The fourth stage is the point when kids have become so involved with drugs for so long that they no longer get a high out of it, but they have to have drugs in the body to function, just to be normal enough to get through a day. And these are the kids who are the new drifters, the burnouts, the zombies, the walking dead. And they are pretty much gone from the family and living on the street. And the family has usually given up and gone through the grief process, letting the kids go. On the first stage, when the kids are really learning about drug use, the losses are zero. So there's nothing to work with in terms of breaking denial. On the second stage, there are some losses. They're fairly mild in terms of the parents' eyes, but they're real to the kid. The kids start to feel awkward and not belonging in the family anymore, and so the family relationship is a loss. They start to give up some loved hobbies and sports, not the main one, but some of the peripheral ones, and activities. At the very end is the first drop in school grades. Still not enough stuff to really reach a parent with the fact that this kid is in crisis and needs tough intervening help. Third stage, when the drug use is breaking out all over the face of the kid's life behaviorally, there's some clear things. The school grades drop. The kid starts talking about dropping out of school. The kid's involved in criminal activities, shoplifting, breaking and entering, vandalism, auto theft often. And if arrests occur, that's some obvious stuff that says, hey, wait a minute, this kid is in trouble. And of course, there's emotional change. Carol Burnett's quote is the great one. It's right on the mark. You're not dealing with your own child. You're dealing with a chemically produced monster. And so there's stuff there to say, hey, wait a minute, this kid is in trouble. Of course, on fourth stage, the losses are severe. The drug use is so heavy that it often produces brain damage. There is clear personality change. I mean, that the person is simply not the human being you knew, a zombie, a burnout. And there's dramatic health change. Kids often have ulcers, severe weight loss, a wheezing cough like someone who is tubercular, and so on. And of course, at the end of the fourth stage comes death. And don't kid yourself, kids die from this disease more than from any other cause today, due to accident, suicide, and even murder in a lethal situation produced by alcohol and drug use. The natural crises that force parents to do something about their child really occur from the middle of stage 3 of the disease down into stage 4. Severe emotional change, a series of arrests, not a single one. The problem is that those natural crises can come so late that there are some permanent losses, that there is a permanent damage to the functioning of the brain of the child, that there is psychological change that is going to take so long to remediate and perhaps never totally recover. The question is, do you really want to wait that late? And I think not. You can break denial earlier, but not by waiting for natural events. You can break parent denial earlier by deliberately using the losses that occur in late stage 2 of the disease and early stage 3. The intervention is a technique where we focus in and add up the changes and the losses and use those in a deliberate counseling way to crash through parent denial so that parents will see the problem earlier and act earlier and save the child from permanent loss. The intervention technique has proved effective with school counselors, psychologists, and teachers that we've worked with. In an overwhelming majority of cases, they have been able to use that information, that behavioral data, and to help families face the problem. What an intervention is a way to prevent losses and damages to both the user and the family by a deliberate, decisive approach. The intervention is simply a designed therapeutic crisis, designed by school personnel with the intent of using collected behavioral data or information about the child to break the parent's denial so the parents see the kid's problem, acknowledge it, and act decisively. The intervention process involves a few simple steps. School staff suspecting this kid has a drug use problem. Putting a list together of the various people in the school who deal with the kid. Not only the teachers, but activity sponsors, coaches, a school secretary if this kid works part-time in the school office, all of the people who know the kid and see the kid daily. Putting a session together where those people who know the kid and care about the kid get together and talk about what they know. Setting an appointment with the parents, having the session with the parents, and then seeing the results. And that's the process. If the staff suspects drug use, it really is based upon observed behavior, the things you're seeing the kid do around the school. And we're talking about changes. If you've known the kid for a while, the changes that occur in that kid's life as they're visible at school tell you something's wrong. Things like lethargy and laziness and lack of energy, a change in appearance, rather dramatic one, either toward slovenly appearance, lack of care, or toward a specific identification with the punk group or the hard rock group and so on. A change in friends, suddenly dropping other achieving or normal healthy friends and picking up with a group who is the fringe, troubled group at school. Moodiness emotionally, truancy, whether it's skipping classes or whether it's skipping whole days, possession, attitude problems, and it goes right on down the line. When you see that, if you're the one who sees it, you put a list together for yourself of other people who have contact with the kid. If the kid works, part-time in the school cafeteria, then whoever the kid works with in the school cafeteria. You think about the bus driver, the school secretary, the janitors, anyone who might have information about the kid. And you approach them individually, and you simply say, hey, I'm concerned about Johnny. What do you think? Are you willing to help me? And you get the group of people together to agree to a meeting to sit down and pool what you know about this kid at school. And that's the beginning. At the meeting, which we call a pre-intervention conference, if you're the one initiating it, you again state your concern for the child and the purpose of the meeting, that you're together to figure out what's going on with this kid and what you can do about it. You ask each participant to describe what they're seeing on the kid, changes they're seeing, their concern. It's important to sort out real fact from just opinion. The fact that Johnny used to be an alert student and now he sits in the back of class and falls asleep half the time. Or there are days when he has a glazed look, as opposed to, I think something's wrong with him. I think something wrong is an opinion. The glazed look in the eyes are real facts. A change in grades, a change in friends, a surly attitude, missing class. And it's important to hone the information that the participants have, the other staff members, to real factual material. And to separate the behavior from actual evidence of drugs. If the kid has joked about being high or smelled booze on the breath or been in possession, you've seen a marijuana joint, because the actual drug information is a red flag that when told to the parents is going to produce a reaction. And so you want to sort out the other kinds of behavioral information that say this kid is in trouble as an opener with the parents. You then make a decision as to which incidents you're going to use, because this meeting is leading to a session where you tell the parents you're concerned about the child. And so for each person who's present from school staff, you sort out the kinds of information that you're actually going to tell the parents. You then get everyone to make written notes. So when you sit down and have the session with the parents, each person is working from a sheet of paper or a card, and they're actually remembering what it is they're going to talk about and not losing important things. You then decide, based on a variety of factors, who's going to talk when the parents actually come in. Usually the person who got the group together opens the session, but the kinds of information different people have, the kind of contact that different people in the group from school staff have had with the parents in the past may determine how to put it together in terms of the parents really hearing what you have to say. The final thing that you do is role play it. Actually get somebody to act like they're the parent or parents, and you role play the whole session. And though at first that seems kind of awkward, if you go through it, you'll end up being a lot more comfortable when the real session with the family occurs. Let's talk about setting the appointment with the parents. The first thing to realize is that a lot of times when you before have tried to tell a parent that their kid has a drug problem, you've done it on the phone or you've done it on the run when the parent is at school for some kind of meeting. And the result is they've been able to react angrily and push you away and push your buttons. If you want to be effective, you have to have the parents' undivided attention, which means a formal conference. Secondly, you got to do it on your turf, where you're sitting in some kind of meeting room in the school, so you're comfortable and the parent is on your turf, not their own. The third thing is the power relationship. Most of the time when it's one of you to two parents, just the human emotional power they have, and it's a lot easier for them to give you a hard time. But if there are 3 or 4 or 5 of you from school staff in the session with 1 or 2 parents, the emotional power shifts. And even though nobody's playing harsh games, the just feeling of talking and listening changes in terms of the weight being with the school staff group, and that's very important. Finally, you've got to have adequate time. You can't do this thing in 5 minutes. You've got to have at least an hour, and sometimes an hour and a half, for the emotional process to occur. And there is an emotional process involved. It's important that if this is a 2-parent family, doesn't matter whether it's the natural parents of the child or a natural parent and the step-parent that the child lives with, both parents have to be present. If not, the parent who gets the information from you and takes it home to the other parent can lose something in the translation and can also walk back into the complicated maze of that family's denial. And so it's important that both parents be present in the case of a 2-parent family. Let's talk about the actual intervention. And I want to stress again that it's a process. It's an actual emotional process that you're going through. It's not so much a lesson you're teaching, but it's feelings that the parents are going to go through. And so in the very beginning, stop and think how it would feel for it to be you and your child sitting on the other side of the table, hearing what is going to be said. What kind of feelings would you go through? What kind of reactions would you have about your child, about yourself, your own identity, your self-worth? Think about that. Because for this to be successful, you have got to constantly, empathetically put yourself in that parent's position, and as you communicate with them, tune in to how they're receiving it, what kind of reaction they're having. When the group gets together, whoever has been chosen as the leader to open it, whether it's the person who initiated it or somebody else in the group, you state why you're there. And why you're there is very simple. You're a group of people that deal with Johnny at school. And you're concerned. You're seeing some things that bother you. And you'd like to share those with the parents and really find out what they're saying. And so the group starts. And one by one, in the order of the intervention, the individuals on school staff talk about the specific behaviors or changes you've seen, excluding any reference to drugs. And as the behavioral information builds up, and it becomes increasingly clear that there is a dramatic change in Johnny's life and that something is wrong, you'll see the parents start to hear it. They'll hear it because what you're saying is familiar. They've been seeing it too. Yeah, they've been minimizing. Yeah, they've been rationalizing. Out of love for their child and fear of their own incompetence, they've been avoiding it. But what they're hearing is familiar stuff. And so they will hear this part of it clearly. As the process moves along, the next thing that occurs after each of you from school staff have shared is you ask the parents what they're seeing. Still haven't mentioned drugs. But you say, what are you seeing? Have things changed at home with Johnny? You're inviting them into your process emotionally. And because they love their child, and I believe most parents love their child, having dealt with 3,400 kids in treatment the last 6.5 years, kids up to their ears in trouble. Every one of the parents, a parent whose heart is breaking and who cares enough to make major sacrifices to help their kid recover, I believe in parent love for kids. And denial is part of that parent love, not a contradiction to it. And you'll see the parents will tell you what they're seeing. Relieved that they're no longer isolated and alone in their child's problem and their fear. That here is somebody else who sees and cares and is being sensitive. And they'll tell you. They'll tell you exactly what they're having trouble with. The defiance at home, the change in emotions and moods and friends, money missing around the house, all of the classic symptoms. They don't want to face what the problem is, but they'll tell you the symptoms they see. And of course what you're doing is instead of you attacking them, the parent enemy, you've done several things. You've identified your care with their care. You care about their child. You believe they're good parents who care about their child. And you've shared together a care about this child who has some problems. You've evidenced some understanding of them. You've invited them into your process in terms of thinking about the symptoms and what the problems are. So you've created some unity between you and them at this point. You've built up a picture of the child's life. All of the trouble, all of the incidences, all of the changes in personality and feelings and appearance and friends and grades and activities. And now you're ready for the dramatic moment. And the dramatic moment is saying the word drugs. If you have real factual evidence of drug use, seeing a kid smoking a joint, the kid owning up to it, finding pills, finding coke or finding marijuana or coke paraphernalia, now is the time to describe that to the parents. If you don't have the factual information, then you've got to raise it as a question. Given what we know about kids who become involved in drugs, pointing out how this kid's current situation and behavior points toward drugs. And it is clearly the dramatic moment. Most of us, when that awful possibility finally hits, explode. We're hurt, we're scared, and when we human beings are hurt and scared, we don't like that feeling. And so what we usually do is cover it with a secondary feeling called anger. We get mad and blame and attack. I can remember that night we busted Mark. I wanted to go out in our small 120-home subdivision, and I wanted to find the neighborhood pusher, and I wanted to kill the SOB. I wanted to choke him to death and watch his eyeballs pop out. And I'm not a violent person. I mean, I wasn't a person for physically wrestling and fighting with the two boys and that kind of thing. But I was hurting so bad inside as a parent with a kid I loved in trouble, I wanted to hurt somebody for it. What happens in the intervention is the parents turn the anger toward the nearest target. And you're it, the person who bore the bad news. And you know the old story about the Greek king who used to kill the messengers that brought bad news? Well, that's an archetypical story about a deep human instinct to attack the bearer of bad news. Most of the time in the past, when that's happened to you, as a school person not trained in this kind of heavy emotional counseling, you've immediately backed away, tried to patch it up, all of the fear about suits. And that has aborted the process of helping that parent face the kid's problem. You see, the anger is a natural one, and it comes out of the parent's love and hurt for the child and fear. They're not really mad with you. They're mad at the whole damn situation of drugs and kids and this tragedy. But you're there, and so you're a symbol for it. And if you understand that, and you don't panic, but simply assure the parent that you're angry too, that you're angry as hell too about the fact that this kid that you care about and that they love is in this kind of trouble. And simply stand with them while their anger rises and gets spent and gets out because they need to get it out. It's kind of like a wave for a surfer. The anger rises and crests, and when it's spent and expressed and the crest begins to come down and the parents are like sagging from the spent emotion, that's the moment at which they become available to really start to do something about the problem. And you never get there if you don't accept the anger being aimed at you, ride with it, assure them of your care for the child, and get through it. And when you get through it, now you're ready to really do business. We describe this on the parent's part as resigned acceptance. It's there. All of this massive behavioral data really does point toward drugs. There's a real problem. And it hurts like hell. And it's embarrassing. It's frightening. But you simply resign yourself to the fact and accept it. And that's what they do. And that's the point at which they will turn and most of the time say, "What do we do?" And you understand what that "we" means? The "we" means you and them. Because in spite of a few seconds earlier targeting their anger towards you, they've really accepted your care and the fact that it's we as a team who are going to have to do something to rescue this child's life. When that happens, of course, the next thing is to immediately talk about the need to go and get a really tough, competent assessment of how bad the child's drug problem is. And the message is a very clear one. You're an amateur as a school person. The parent has such an emotional vested interest in the child and not wanting to see how bad it is that they're only going to see the tip of the iceberg, about 10%. And so the need is to get a really tough, competent assessment to find out how bad the problem is, and if it's bad enough, to get immediate treatment. It's important to have available for the parent some information about the nature of the disease, about good resources for assessment, and about resources you would personally trust for your own child for treatment of their child. Treatment resources that provide an absolutely controlled drug-free atmosphere for a minimum of 90 days, that use the basic AA steps as the recovery process, that involve the family, and that see abstinence as the only way to recovery and health. For the parents who, after you have crested and hit the bottom, who aren't into resigned acceptance, aren't ready to act yet, and some parents aren't. The crisis you've provided is the penultimate one, the one before the last one. And they may need one more crisis for something to happen. You simply provide them with material about the disease and resources, and try to point them toward a parent self-help group. Tough Love is a great one, with other parents who are facing the problem and can support them to face it. Families Anonymous is another great group to help them. And if neither one of those groups exist, Al-Anon, which is for family members of alcohol and drug-dependent people. Other families will end the session angry. They can't get through their anger. They're not ready. They're still into denial. And that's okay too. They may leave angry, and you may have a pit in your stomach of fear. But for those parents, because the kid is in trouble, the natural crises are going to come with unrelenting regularity. Their kid's problem is going to force them to face it sooner or later, and going to create explosive moments of pain as they go along. One of those crises, in all likelihood, will be the last one, and they will finally resign and accept it. And you know who they're going to come back to? Not the people who sucked up to them and contributed to their denial. And even though they may have left you angry and blaming, because you had the guts out of care to tell them the truth before they were ready to hear it, they're going to come back to you. Because they can trust you to honestly help them face their child's problem. They can trust you because you were right before they were ready to hear it. And our experience is that time and again, parents have come back to the teacher, the school counselor, who put that intervention together and had the guts to tell them, even though they left that person angrily at the time. It's worth doing. Let me mention one other thing. In talking to school groups, and I have spoken to teachers in probably 30 states, I always hear about the danger of telling parents the kid has a drug problem. The mythical case about the teacher or counselor who got sued up the gazoo, and it's always in the other corner of the state. A friend of mine was the administrative assistant to the Attorney General, and I called him and had them run a computer search, and guess what? The court case never happened. It turned out there was a reason for that. There has been a body of federal constitutional law based on court cases that says that you cannot sue a public servant who makes an honest mistake in the normal pursuit of their duties. Now, if they're malicious or negligent, yes. But if a teacher has reasonable evidence or counselor to think this kid has a drug problem and tells the parent that is an honest mistake in the pursuit of their duties, and it will not be accepted as a case by any court in the land once somebody files evidence of the federal body of law. And so it's that simple. You can't be sued. When you look parents in the eye and say drugs, it's a scary moment. Not because of the threat to sue, because I've just explained how that's not a danger. But the emotional moment of delivering that awful message is scary. And if you're a teacher or a school counselor who's not lived in an environment of heavy emotional counseling, it produces real anxiety. But I want to tell you that for those people who have learned this technique and have done it again and again, it has become addictive. Because they have watched with broken heart kids they care about literally die inside in front of their eyes. And by doing this and going through the awful moment of saying drugs and helping parents face it and take decisive action, they have been able to be a part of seeing kids come to life again, begin to learn, become happy and healthy and normal. And for a teacher whose life is caring about kids and helping growth, that is a supreme moment.